At the family dinner, Dad said, "I'm proud of all my children except the loser sitting at the table." Everyone laughed. I stood up quietly, put a secret paper on the table, and said, "For you, Dad. Happy Father's Day." Then I went outside and took back the fancy car I had given him. Moments later, he screamed when he finally opened it. I didn't run away. Running would have meant I was scared or guilty. I just walked. I walked slowly and carefully, like someone checking all the numbers in a big money report, leaving nothing out. Every step was calm and steady. I could hear my heels click on the pavement of the driveway, making a sharp, steady sound, like a clock counting time. It was a rhythm that reminded me of being careful, precise, and in control. The car was waiting for me under the porch. It was a shiny Porsche 911, painted a deep midnight blue. In some light, it looked black. It had cost $115,000, which is a lot of money, more than most people make in a year. I had paid for it with cash 3 days ago. Dad had spent the last 20 minutes showing off this car to my brothers, thinking it was his Father's Day gift. He thought that even though he had been mean to me for years, I would still try to make him happy with an expensive toy. He was very wrong. The car wasn't a gift. It was my getaway car. I opened the driver's side door and slid into the seat. The smell hit me instantly. It was the rich leather smell of a brand new car. It smelled like power and winning, like being smart and prepared. I closed the door, and suddenly the world outside disappeared. The loud dinner, the clinking forks, the laughter that had made fun of me, it all went away with the solid thud of the car door. I was in my own safe, quiet world. I pressed the start button. The engine roared to life, a deep growl of 400 horsepower. That was when the front door of the house flew open. Dad ran out onto the porch. He looked scared and confused. His mouth opened and closed, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. The glass and metal of the car kept his voice away from me for the first time in 26 years. I felt calm. For the first time, I didn't feel small or powerless. He stumbled down the steps, waving his arms, pointing at the car, pointing at me. He looked smaller than I remembered. Without the head of the table to stand at, without my brothers to cheer him on, he was just an angry man in a suit. I now held the power, the control, the upper hand. He reached the driveway and grabbed the door handle. It clicked, but the door didn't open. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't look away. I looked straight at him through the tinted glass. I saw the moment he got scared. He wasn't scared because I was taking the car. He was scared because for the first time, I was looking at him not as a daughter looks at a father, but as a boss looking at a problem. I shifted the car into drive. I didn't speed away. I didn't make the tires screech. That would have been emotional. That would have been dramatic. Instead, I moved the car slowly forward, making him step back or get hit. He stepped back. As I drove down the long driveway by the lake, I looked in the rearview mirror. Dad was standing alone in the gravel, getting smaller and smaller. My brothers, Darian and Callum, ran out onto the porch behind him. They looked like confused kids who had just been told playtime was over. I didn't feel any guilt, no sadness, no anger. I felt calm and clear-headed. I was in control. I merged onto the highway and let the car go fast. The speed pushed me back into the seat. It felt like a hug from all the power I had been denied for too long. For 26 years, I had been invisible, the backup plan, the quiet one who didn't matter in the real estate world. They had trained me to be quiet, thinking I would obey. But silence is smart. It's where you can plan your moves. It's where you can see mistakes before anyone else does. It's where you can get ready for the moment when everything changes. I drove toward the city, toward the tall glass tower that had our family name on it, my name. The dinner was over. The real battle was just beginning. But before I continue, hit the subscribe button and tell me where are you watching this from, and what time of day is it? 2 hours earlier, the dining room smelled of roasted lamb and self-praise. Dad had invited us to announce he was becoming CEO of Thornfield and Stone, the company he had built for 30 years. The crystal glasses were polished. The fancy wine was ready. I was sitting at the far end of the table, quiet and invisible. My brothers, Darian and Callum, sat on either side of Dad like princes, waiting for their turn to take over. Darian, 29, was an architect who never finished a building on time or under budget. Callum, 24, was an influencer who spent the family money traveling and buying things. They were loud, confident, and very bad at running a business. They were exactly what Dad loved. Dad stood up, tapping his glass with a silver spoon. "To the future," he began, his voice loud. "I have decided it is time to secure the future of this family." He looked at Darian. He looked at Callum. He didn't look at me. I am giving our most valuable properties to my sons. Darian will handle development. Callum will handle branding. The brothers smiled and clinked their glasses. Darian shot me a look that said, "Know your place." Then Dad finally looked at me. It wasn't a mean look. It was a pity. "You're too fragile for this world, Marceline. Real estate is a tough game. Your brothers will take care of you when I am gone." Fragile. That word hung in the air. I looked at my plate, letting the insult settle. He didn't see me as smart. He didn't see me as strong. He saw me as small and quiet. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that being quiet is not being empty. Being quiet is hiding, watching, and planning. For 10 years, I had been invisible. While they were talking over me, I was listening. While they were bragging, I was reading their contracts. I knew the rules they ignored. I knew the money problems they didn't notice. I knew the company better than our CFO. Being invisible gave me access. Nobody hides things from the furniture. Nobody shreds papers in front of a ghost. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I nodded and took a sip of water. I thought about the paper in my purse. The paper that proved I didn't need Dad to give me the properties. I had already bought the company that owned them. "To the future," Dad toasted, raising his glass. Darian and Callum repeated it. I raised my glass too, but my toast was silent. My family had a story about me. In their story, I was a low-level assistant at a small investment bank. Dad liked that version. It made me small. It made me easy to control. He could pat me on the head and ask if I was still filing papers. The truth was more complicated, and a lot more expensive. I wasn't just an assistant. I was a senior associate in mergers and acquisitions. I didn't just file papers. I bought struggling companies for pennies and made them profitable again. I spent my days looking at balance sheets that were just like my father's, messy, arrogant, and about to collapse. For 5 years, I had a secret life. By day, I closed big deals in boardrooms my father couldn't even get a meeting in. By night, I came home to my small apartment, cooked simple meals for myself, and went to bed early. I didn't tell anyone about my work. Nobody at the family dinner knew that I had spent years learning how to make businesses strong and safe. My brothers thought they were smart. They thought they were ready to run the company. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't see the problems they had created, the mistakes they had made, or the opportunities they had wasted. They didn't see that I had been quietly collecting the knowledge, the money, and the power I would need to take control. Being invisible gave me patience. Being invisible gave me time. Being invisible gave me a chance to plan. They had spent years talking over me. I had spent years watching them talk. Now it was time to act. The Porsche roared along the highway. The city skyline grew closer. The glass tower with our name on it reflected the sunlight, glittering like a jewel. It wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of everything my family thought they owned. Everything they thought they controlled. And now I was about to take it. I remembered all the times Dad had ignored me. All the times he had said I was too fragile, too weak, too quiet. I remembered the birthdays when he only praised my brothers, the holidays when he treated me like I didn't matter. I remembered every insult, every laugh, every moment they thought I was invisible. And I smiled quietly inside. Because I wasn't invisible. I had never been invisible. I had just been waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the moment when silence became power, when invisibility became control, when the quiet girl became the one everyone had to watch. As the Porsche sped along the road, I thought about the future. Not the future Dad had imagined. Not the future my brothers had imagined. My future. A future I had built with my own hands, my own brain, my own money. And when I reached the glass tower, I knew the real game was about to start. I wasn't running. I wasn't scared. I wasn't weak. I was Marceline Thompson, and for the first time, I was truly free. At night, I was just a quiet daughter. I would sit and nod my head politely while Darian talked. He liked to explain big ideas, like new buildings he wanted to make. He talked about how the buildings would look and what people would feel inside them. But the truth was, he hadn't even started building anything. He forgot something very important. The permission from the city, the permits. Without them, the buildings couldn't be built at all. I didn't plan to buy Thornfield and Stone at first. That wasn't my goal. I just wanted to make sure that the money and things my family would leave me, my inheritance, weren't disappearing. I didn't want it to vanish into thin air, like smoke from a candle. I wanted to protect it. I wanted to make sure that when my father retired or passed on, there would still be something real for me to inherit. 6 months ago, I decided to check the company's money carefully. I had special access because Thompson, my father, kept the passwords on a sticky note under his keyboard. It was so easy to find, as if he wanted me to see it. I used the passwords to run a forensic audit. That's a fancy way of saying I looked very carefully at the company's finances, like a detective looking for clues. What I found was shocking. The company wasn't really a business anymore. It was like a giant piggy bank, filled with money going in and out, but not in the right way. The firm was losing money very fast. Thompson had borrowed a lot of money using the company's buildings as security. But the money wasn't being used to make new buildings, or to advertise, or to improve anything. Where was the money going? It was going straight into Darian and Callum's pockets. They had made fake companies, shell companies, and were paying themselves huge amounts from Thornfield and Stone. Darian spent $300,000 for architectural research, which was really just a 3-week trip to Milan, Italy. Callum got $250,000 a year just to be called a brand ambassador, even though he had never brought a single client to the company. Thompson was using the company's money to fund his son's silly dreams. He thought he was very smart and very important, but he was just burning everything up. He was like someone trying to heat a house by burning the furniture. He thought he was a titan of industry, but really he was wasting everything. I realized then that there would be nothing left for me to inherit. If I waited for Thompson to retire, I would inherit nothing, an empty crater. So I decided to take action. I stopped just being a daughter and started being someone who could buy a company. I became an acquirer. I made a fake company called Nemesis Holdings. The name was cheeky and funny, like a secret joke, but I knew Thompson would never notice it. Then I started buying parts of the company's debt. I went to the small shareholders, people who owned tiny parts of the company but were ignored by Thompson. They were desperate to sell. The company was failing, and they wanted to get out before losing everything. I offered them a little more than the market value of their shares, and they agreed immediately. They didn't ask who was behind Nemesis Holdings. They just signed. It took me 4 months to acquire 49% of the company. That's almost half, but I needed 51% to control it. That was the hard part. That was the impossible part. Thompson held the rest in the family trust, and normally, those shares could not be bought. Then, 3 weeks ago, something surprising happened. A notification popped up on my computer screen. Some voting shares were now available in the private market. These shares didn't belong to Thompson. They were the shares held in trust for Darian and Callum, my brothers. I stared at the screen. My brothers weren't just incompetent, they were careless. They were selling parts of the company to pay for their own mistakes. I didn't hesitate. I clicked the button to buy. The money left my account, and the control entered my portfolio. Just like that, I owned 51% of Thornfield and Stone. I owned the building. I owned the brand. I even owned the desk my father used to sit at. I didn't say a word. I printed the acquisition deed, slid it into a black envelope, and waited for Father's Day. I drove out of the city and pulled over at a scenic overlook. Below me, the city lights sparkled like a giant carpet of stars. I turned off the car engine and breathed. The silence inside the car was deep. It was very different from the storm of notifications on my phone. The phone was hot and vibrating. 57 notifications. My thumb swiped up, scrolling through them one by one, without feeling anything. Darian wrote, "Are you crazy? Dad is freaking out. Bring the car back now." Callum wrote, "You ruined the vibe. Nobody thinks this is funny." Thompson left a voicemail for Marceline. "Pick up the phone. I don't know what kind of sick prank this is, but stealing my car is a crime. I'm calling the police if you don't bring it back in 10 minutes. I listened to my father's voicemail twice. His voice wasn't scared. It was annoying. He still believed he was in charge, scolding someone he thought was misbehaving. He hadn't read the papers, or maybe he couldn't believe what was happening. To him, I was just ruining the vibe. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain anything. I just turned on Do Not Disturb. The screen went dark. Silence returned. I sat there for an hour, watching the city below me, knowing that tomorrow everything in that tall glass building would be different. Monday morning came gray and sharp. I put on a special suit I had bought for this day. It was made of charcoal wool, perfectly fitted. I didn't wear jewelry. I didn't wear makeup. I wanted to look like a blade, sharp and strong. I arrived at the Thornfield and Stone building at 8 a.m. The lobby was quiet. I walked past the reception desk, where I used to smile nervously when visiting my father. Today I didn't smile. I walked straight to the security station. "Good morning, Miss Thornfield," the head of security said. He looked nervous. He had received the memo I sent at 4 a.m. "Good morning, Gideon. Do you have the new access codes?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am. Updated at midnight," he said. "Good." I took the elevator to the executive floor. The doors slid open with a soft chime. The office was exactly as I remembered. Plush carpets, mahogany walls, and the smell of old money. But the energy was different. The staff and assistants looked up as I walked by. They already knew something had changed. Rumors travel fast. At 9:15 a.m., the elevator chimed again. Thompson strode out, wearing his power suit. But his face looked tired and worried. He had stayed up too long, running on caffeine and anger. He marched to the glass doors of the CEO's office. He swiped his key card. Beep, beep, beep. Red light. He frowned and swiped again. Beep, beep, beep. "What the hell?" he muttered, rattling the handle. He turned to his assistant, a young woman named Isolde, who he had called Isolde for 3 years. "Isolde, open the door," he said. "My card is not working, Mr. Thornfield," she said. "Why not?" he shouted. "Because it's not your office anymore," I said, my voice calm but sharp like a knife. Thompson spun around. I was standing in the doorway of the boardroom with 2 lawyers from the company. They weren't smiling. "Enough. Give me my car keys and stop embarrassing yourself." "You're fired," Thompson shouted. "I didn't read the fine print, Dad," I said. "You can't fire me, but I can stop you from entering." I signaled to Gideon, who stepped out with 2 guards. "Please step away from the door, Mr. Thornfield," Gideon said firmly. Thompson looked at Gideon, then at me, then at the red light on the card reader. Slowly, he realized this wasn't a joke. "You can't do this." "I built this place," he whispered. "You built the show." "I fixed it. I bought the real part," I said. I walked into the boardroom. "Bring him in, Gideon. Bring his sons too. It's time for the shareholder meeting." The boardroom was cold, set to 68 degrees because Thompson always said it kept people awake. Now he shivered in his chair. Darian and Callum sat across from him, refusing to look at him. They looked like schoolboys waiting for the principal, not the important businesspeople Thompson had bragged about at dinner. Thompson slammed his hand on the mahogany table. It made a hollow sound. "This is illegal," he shouted. "You can't just buy a company and take it from the CEO. I control 51% of the votes through the family trust. You may own debt, Marceline, but you don't have the votes to remove me." I looked at him calmly. "The votes don't matter anymore," I said. "You made mistakes. Your sons made mistakes. And I turned them to my advantage. Now I am in charge." He stared at me, trying to understand. His face changed. His ego, which had always been huge, started to crack. His voice trembled. You can't do this," he said again, more like a scared child than a titan of industry. "Yes, I can," I said. "And I did. You thought you were untouchable. You thought the company would always belong to you. But it doesn't. It belongs to me now." My father slumped in his chair. Darian and Callum avoided looking at him. The staff in the room looked at me with quiet respect. The air felt different now. Everything was different. I owned Thornfield and Stone. I had saved the company from ruin. I had saved the legacy my family had worked for. I had turned myself from just a quiet daughter into the person in charge. The future was mine now, and I would make sure the company thrived. I walked to the front of the big, shiny table. I did not sit down. I only placed another folder on the polished wood. It felt cool under my hands. I heard the soft thump of it hitting the table. It was quiet, except for the slight echo in the large boardroom. "That was true 6 months ago, Dad," I said. My voice was calm, but steady. "You made a mistake." He looked at me. Thompson Thornfield, my father, the man who built an empire, the man who believed he could control everything, looked confused. He squinted at the folder and at me. "You trusted the people around you," I continued, "and you thought they actually cared about your company. But they didn't. Not really." I opened the folder. Inside, there were papers. Copies of wire transfers, stock sale agreements, contracts, and emails. Everything. The evidence of how I had quietly built control. "You see, Thompson," I said slowly, "I didn't buy the company from strangers. I didn't have to fight a long, hard battle on the open market. I bought it quietly, privately, through people you trusted." I turned my eyes toward my brothers, Darian and Callum. Thompson froze. His mouth slightly open, his eyes wide. Slowly, like a rusty machine, he turned his head to look at his sons. Darian was staring at the floor, trying not to look at anyone. Callum was biting his thumbnail, just like he had done since he was a little boy. It was a nervous habit, and it never seemed to go away. What is she talking about?" Thompson whispered, almost to himself. His voice shook. Tell him, Darian, I said. Tell him about online gambling. Tell him about the $80,000 you lost in one weekend in Las Vegas. Darian's eyes widened. He tried to speak, but his voice came out small and shaky. I didn't know it would matter, he mumbled. I turned to Callum. And you? Tell him about the crypto plan. Tell him how you used your future inheritance to cover your margin call. You know, the one that could have ruined you. We needed cash. Marceline offered us a buyout. She said it was just a shell company. We didn't know it was her. And you sold my company. Thompson's face turned red. He stood up so fast his chair tipped backward with a loud clatter. The room echoed with the noise. You sold my company, he roared. His voice was loud, angry, shaking, and full of disbelief. You sold my life's work to a shell company. How could you? Callum yelled back, defensive. You always said the company would be ours one day anyway. We just cashed out early. What's the big deal? I watched them turn on each other. Their voices bounced off the walls, but it was sad to watch. It was pathetic. They were like children, fighting over a toy they didn't really understand. And that's exactly the problem with the empire you built, Dad. I raised my voice so everyone could hear, and the shouting stopped for a moment. This is the problem with the way you raised them, I said. You spent 30 years teaching these boys that money was the only measure of success. You taught them that loyalty was something you could buy, not something you earned. You built a legacy that looked impressive on the outside, but inside, it was fake. I walked over to the window and looked at the city below. The sunlight reflected off the glass towers. The streets looked alive, full of cars and people. But the city didn't impress me. Not today. You thought you were raising heirs, I said, my voice soft now but still firm. But you were raising parasites. They didn't betray you because they hated you. They betrayed you because you taught them that everything has a price. You valued their arrogance over my competence. You valued their gender over my loyalty. And in the end, the golden boys you worshipped were the ones holding the knife while I signed the check. Thompson sank back into his chair, or tried to, but it was old and rickety. He slumped against the table, staring at his sons, then back at me. The betrayal wasn't that I had beaten him. The betrayal was that the reflection he had spent 30 years staring at, his sons, was finally clear. They were not kings. They were greedy children who had sold their father for a wire transfer. I own 51%, I repeated. And as the majority shareholder, I am calling for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO. I looked at Darian and Callum. Raise your hands, boys. You're voting with me today. It's in the contract. Slowly, shamefully, my brothers raised their hands. They didn't look at me. They didn't look at Dad. They just lifted their hands, small and reluctant, like kids being forced to admit a mistake. Thompson put his head in his hands. The vote was unanimous. Darian and Callum didn't stay to comfort their father. They didn't help him pack his things. As soon as the vote was recorded, they scrambled for the door like rats, sensing the ship had finally snapped in half. I watched them leave. Two men who had spent their entire lives shielded by their last name and their gender, now running from the consequences of their own greed. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Thompson and me alone. The silence was thick. He looked smaller, older. In the span of 20 minutes, he had aged 10 years. The arrogance that usually held his spine straight was gone. Now he slumped in a chair that no longer felt like his. He looked around the room, as if he had never seen it before. The mahogany table, the glass walls, the chairs, the city view, all of it looked alien. I don't understand, he whispered. His voice was low and trembling. It's not a demand anymore, I said. It's a lesson. I saw the reports. I saw the personnel files. I knew what was happening. I knew what I had to do. How? How did you build the capital? How did you move that much money without me noticing? His voice cracked. I walked to the head of the table. I didn't sit in his chair. I leaned against the edge and looked down at him. You didn't see it, I said, because you weren't looking. And even if you had looked, your brain wouldn't have processed it. He frowned. His eyes were glassy, confused. What are you talking about? It's a psychological thing, Dad, I explained. A cognitive blind spot. You built a world where only men could build empires. In your reality, Darian and Callum were the heirs because they shared your last name and your gender. I was just furniture in the background. Scenery. Someone to ignore. I crossed my arms. I could have left the acquisition contracts on your desk. You would have used them as coasters. You didn't ignore me because I was hiding. You ignored me because seeing me succeed would have destroyed your ego. To see me as a threat, You would have had to admit that a daughter could be smarter than a son. And you couldn't do it. Thompson stared at me, mouth slightly open. His face was pale. The truth hurts more than money, doesn't it? I asked quietly. He didn't answer. I sat at your dinner tables for 26 years. I continued, my voice soft but firm. I listened to you brag about deals you didn't understand. I watched you bleed this company dry to cover my brother's mistakes. Every time you interrupted me, every time you ignored me, you gave me more cover. You built the shadows I hid in. Thompson looked down at his hands. They were shaking. I thought I was protecting the family, he said. No, I corrected him. You were protecting your reflection. You looked at my brothers and saw yourself. You looked at me and saw nothing. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a final envelope. It was plain white. Not fancy. Just a normal HR envelope. This is your severance package, I said. I slid it across the polished wood. It includes 3 months of salary and health benefits for the rest of the year. Standard for someone who is leaving after being terminated for cause. He looked at the envelope with revulsion. Terminated for cause, I said. Gross negligence, misuse of company funds, breach of fiduciary duty. You are lucky I'm not pressing criminal charges for the embezzlement regarding your son's consulting fees. Consider that my final gift to the family. Thompson stood up slowly. The titan of industry, the man who had walked into boardrooms with his head high, was gone. All that remained was a small, broken man holding a white envelope and a set of keys that no longer worked. Marceline, he said, his voice breaking. I'm your father. I know, I said. That's why I'm giving you 10 minutes to clear out your desk before security escorts you from the building. A stranger would have only got 5. I turned my back on him and walked to the window. I heard him hesitate, waiting for me to look back, waiting for the daughter who had begged for his approval to break down. But that daughter didn't exist anymore. She had been acquired, restructured, and upgraded. I heard his footsteps retreat. I heard the door open and close. The room was silent. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like ownership. I stood alone in the boardroom. The space was vast, designed to intimidate, designed to make people feel small. But it didn't feel that way anymore. It felt like a blank canvas, a place where I could create something new. I walked over to the massive window that spanned the wall. The city was waking up below me. Cars moved like rivers of light. People walked like ants. The view my father had always coveted now looked ordinary. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened my contacts list. Thompson Thornfield block. Darian Thornfield block. Callum Thornfield block. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Light. Weightless. Like a diver cutting loose the weights that held her down. I walked over to the head of the table where my briefcase sat. Next to it were the keys to the Porsche. I picked them up, feeling the cold metal in my palm. Yesterday the car had been a weapon. A symbol of rebellion, a way to escape. Today it was just a car. Just a machine. Nothing had power over me anymore. I dropped the keys into my desk drawer and shut it. I sat in the CEO's chair. It was comfortable. It fit me perfectly. I spun the chair around slowly to face the door. There was work to do. Audits to run. Plans to make. A company to rebuild. It would be hard. Lonely at times. But it was mine. They had tried to erase me for 26 years. They failed. The most important part of a building isn't the spire that touches the clouds. It's the foundation hidden in the dark, holding everything up. I was the foundation. And now I was in complete control.